Excellency Yoweri Museveni, President of the Republic of Uganda, Excellency Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, President of Liberia, Professor Mutharika, the President of the Republic of Malawi, Prime Minister Desalegn, Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Honorable Ministers and Commissioners, Ambassador Maged Abdelaziz, Under-Secretary General and Special Advisor on Africa at the United Nations, Amir Dossal, Chairman of the Global Partnerships Forum, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my distinct pleasure to give you a very warm welcome on behalf of Africa Investor to the 2015 AI African Heads of State and Investment Advisory Council Dialogue. This council was launched a number of years ago at the New York Stock Exchange in partnership with the African Union, UN OSA, and the Global Partnerships Forum as a platform to engage heads of state on the investment agenda each year during the UN General Assembly. Africa Investor as an institution has dedicated itself to promoting and intermediating capital to African investment opportunities through our growing domestic and global investment partnerships and platforms. Excellencies, we recognize your dedication to place Africa's priorities at the center of the imminent Sustainable Development Goals, and we applaud your continued recognition that the private sector has a critical role to play in mobilizing its human and financial resources to assist the continent in realizing its development potential in the context of the global and domestic development frameworks and priorities. We at Africa Investor are delighted to have provided leadership of our own in support of your efforts in sensitizing, bringing together the private sector and the investment community, the results of which are today launched in our seminal business statement entitled The Business of African Economic Development, Implementing the Sustainable Development and Finance Goals in Support of Agenda 2063. And I do believe that my colleagues will be sharing a copy of that statement before I've concluded with my opening remarks. The business statement is the result of a 12-month Africa Investor consultative process with over 200 business leaders and investors operating in Africa. The business statement reflects the recommendations and the collective views of the private sector leaders working in Africa on optimal ways to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. The business statement calls on public and private sector leaders to advance the pursuit and achievement of the SDGs, but in particular to expand the role of the business community in the implementation of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, agreed to by all UN member states at the 3rd International Conference on Financing for Development. And we ask that leaders prioritize the implementation in this context of the African Union's Agenda 2063. And ultimately, the statement will also be used to focus discussions at our upcoming AI Presidential CEO Investment Summit that will be held in partnership with NEPAD and the African Union in January during the 2016 African Union Heads of State in Ethiopia. Your Excellencies, in essence, the statement highlights the commitment of business to play its economic leadership role, but in particular urges that we try to avoid conflicting priorities and therefore encourage the negotiation of the harmonization between the Financing for Development agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals in support of the overall implementation of our homegrown agenda, Agenda 2063. The statement sets out 7 recommended areas of focus for public-private collaboration. Firstly, the infrastructure investment and the development of African skills with a particular focus on project development, supporting project developers on the continent to co-develop and partner with international skilled technical partners. The second is capital markets development, where we see a lot of opportunity for institutions like the African Securities Exchanges Association and the African Venture Capital Association and institutional securities firms and market makers to really assist deepen the capital markets to take advantage of the full growth opportunity. The third key priority theme is climate finance, and with the imminent COP negotiations to take place in Paris, we think that the private sector could add some value as a key partner in that particular discussion, and then post that discussion in its implementation. Technology and innovation. Billions of dollars are routinely spent within companies to find solutions to market-related challenges as well as opportunities, and that is a rich resource for the public sector to potentially tap as we seek to leapfrog a number of our development scenarios. Industrial and SME development is also a key theme where the private sector can provide a lot of leadership and value, particularly in the context of the continental free trade area and unlocking those benefits. Import substitution, we believe, is another priority area, whilst it's been on the agenda for a good time now. The numbers are quite startling when you recognize that approximately $30 billion is paid by the continent each year in goods that we produce on the continent, export, and then we re-import them in a premium state. If you compare that with the aid that's received, which is less than $30 billion, I think it begs a question. The seventh and final point, but not least by any means, is women's empowerment. As we strive to unlock economic potential, we think that the opportunity to empower the women's debate and the women's economic agenda is critical. 50% of our resources reside with women, and if we don't properly engage them, then that is a deficit to the continent. Excellencies, we call on you on the eve of the Sustainable Development Goals Summit to share your vision for the implementation of the SDGs in Africa and the role and partnership that you would like to advance with the business and investment community working to that end. Africa Investor and its partners here today stand ready to partner you on creating the environment for domestic and international businesses working in Africa to create the requisite jobs and growth to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2063. I'd now like to call on our friend and partner, Ambassador Abdelaziz, to give some opening remarks. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Hubert. Honorable heads of state and government, excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Ban Ki-moon, it is with great pleasure that I welcome all of you today to the 2015 African Heads of State and Government Investment Working Lunch, which aims at enhancing Africa's attractiveness to public and private capital flows and to fostering partnerships between African leaders and the international business and investment communities. I wish to thank particularly our partners, Africa Investor, the Global Partnership Forum, and the Thomson Reuters for co-hosting this high-level event, and to most sincerely thank our African dignitaries who are gracing our event with their presence today. His Excellency President Yoweri Museveni, President of the Republic of Uganda, Her Excellency President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, President of the Republic of Liberia, His Excellency President Arthur Peter Mutharika, President of the Republic of Malawi, and His Excellency Haile Mariam Desalegn, Prime Minister of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. Excellencies, we are all commend your leading role and relentless efforts in engaging actively with the private sector. Ladies and gentlemen, at the United Nations, we firmly believe in the power of bringing together partners to advance common objectives. That is why the United Nations Secretary General has been committed to harnessing the full potential partnership in support of Africa in his consecutive initiatives, such as the Sustainable Energy for All and the Global Education First initiative, to name just a few. These initiatives have given space to all stakeholders, and in particular the private sector, philanthropists, and civil society to contribute to both the global and regional development agenda. This commitment to partnership is very much present in the forthcoming Global Development Framework that the United Nations member states will adopt at the end of this week. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development will guide our development efforts at all levels towards the transformation of our world in the next 15 years, in areas of critical importance for humanity and for our planet. Similarly, this year, the African leaders have also adopted their people-centered transformative agenda, the African Union Agenda 2063, which charts the way to inclusive growth and sustainable development for the next 50 years. To fast-track the implementation of Agenda 2063, the first 10 years implementation plan was adopted in June 2015 to highlight priority projects and initiatives centered around regional integration, inter-African trade and investment, food security and poverty eradication, industrialization, good governance, access to sustainable energy and quality education, as well as peace and security across the continent. The bottom-up approach that the African Plan champions definitely offers significant opportunities for multi-stakeholders, partnerships, and the private sector engagement. I am pleased to note that the United Nations is considered among the key implementing partners, and that the United Nations Secretary General was among the first to commit to support the African Union in this ambitious agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Agenda 2063 speak to each other in a way that most of the development priorities of African people are integrated in the global agenda. Implementing both ambitious agendas will require massive investments. That is why private investments and public-private partnerships will be essential to realize the promise of a people-centered development in Africa and globally. At the global level, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda on Financing for Development of July 2015 has put forward concrete policy actions that draw upon all sources of finance, technology, and innovation by all stakeholders, including private sector. Countries have committed in the action agenda to strengthen their enabling environment and adopt public policies and regulatory frameworks for encouraging private investments. I would like here to express particular thanks to the Federal Republic of Ethiopia for hosting the Financing for Development conference and for all their efforts that led to a very successful conclusion. And to thank the President of the 69th session of the General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Sam Kutesa, who is among us today, for all the efforts that he have exerted to reach both the Agenda 2030 and the Financing for Development Accords. Within this context, we observe with admiration the efforts undertaken by African stakeholders to set up various financial intermediation vehicles, such as the Africa 50 Fund, the Africa Credit Guarantee Facility, the Africa Investment Bank, the Africa Infrastructure Development Facility, and the Diaspora Bonds. I wish to highlight here that several African countries such as Ethiopia, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, and Egypt have been using such vehicles to fund their infrastructure projects within the domestic resources mobilization policy approved at the African Union level. But despite that, more effort needs to be done to unlock resources from innovative instruments and to harness their full potential. The potential role of Sovereign Wealth Fund in development financing was among the key messages in our joint working lunch last year. Along with Africa Investors Pension and Sovereign Wealth Fund forums for 2014 and 2015, my office, along with the Organization for Economic and Cooperation and Development, the African Union Commission, the NEPAD Planning and Coordinating Agency, the ECA, and the Global Compact organized a high-level event to highlight the importance of leveraging pension funds for financing infrastructure development in Africa at the margins of the Financing for Development Conference in Addis Ababa last July. The adoption of the 2014 Dakar Agenda for Action on Financing Africa's Infrastructure also, and more recently, the launch of the Continental Business Network are all testimony of the positive transition towards a public-private approach to the implementation of Africa's regional infrastructure development. The 16 infrastructure projects identified in the Dakar Agenda will have significant impact on advancing the regional integration. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a time to invest in Africa. The Africa Rising narrative remains valid. Africa remains among the top economic growth performance region, and Africa is waiting for investment in the next phase to fully implement the Agenda 2063 and the Action Agenda for Financing for Development. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank Ambassador Magid Abdulaziz and Mr. Hubert Danso for the opening remarks. My name is Amir Dossel. I am the chairman of Global Partnerships Forum and privileged to be part of this exciting venture. As the previous speakers have said, I think it's not just Africa's year, it's Africa's decade. Africa is open for business, and I also would like to endorse Ambassador Magid's remarks that His Excellency, President Sam Kutesa, did a remarkable job in really taking that lead for what is going to be a historic set of new development agenda for the United Nations system as a whole, and that means for the world as a whole. So thank you, sir. There are a number of Africans who've done great work at the UN, and the leading person is here. Ambassador Magid, thank you for what you do, sir. There's another dynamic lady, Ms. Amina Mohammed, who ran the post-2015 development agenda, who's not with us, is also, we admire her, we love her for what she's been doing. Thank you. So I'll get right into it. The SDGs, those of you who know it will understand that they just cannot be achieved by member states alone. Not even if you said, let's have the private sector implement it. They will not be able to do it. Civil society cannot do it. The emphasis is on collaboration. It's about partnerships. And I'm afraid often people tend to think that, well, we can't do business in Africa. Yes, you can. Africa has the highest growth rate on average in the world. If you were to exclude China's last decade, for example, when the financial crisis happened, Africa was immune to it. And today we have an opportunity to learn from the specifics of how you can be in Uganda, in Malawi, in South Sudan, Ethiopia, etc. Wherever you want, there is a lot of business activity going on. And what we want today, as Hubert mentioned, we don't want you to leave the room without committing some creative ideas of how you can invest in Africa. The delegations are here from the different countries, so we want you to take advantage of that after this high-level segment. And on that note, without further ado, I would like to invite President Museveni, who is not new to this forum. President Museveni, last year you were so inspiring when we held that session at the New York Stock Exchange, and we want to welcome you back. And we also hope that your hand gets cured very quickly so you can sign and write a check for us as well. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. The organizers of the meeting and the Excellency Sarif, Right Honorable Prime Minister of Ethiopia, His Excellency the President of Malawi, and all the, I'm told there are rich people in the audience. I'm emphasizing the rich people because I don't want to talk to poor people. because I've got enough poor people in Uganda, I don't have to waste time talking to another batch of exotic poor people. Now, here I'm talking about common interest. We are talking about prosperity. How can we enhance prosperity in the world so that you are more prosperous, if you are prosperous already, and we are also prosperous. Prosperity through production of goods and services. There you need two players. Player number one, the producer of a good or a service. Player number two, the consumer of the good or the service. If you have those two, you are going to get prosperity. If I produce wealth, I produce a good or a service, and nobody buys, I will not continue. My business would be in trouble. And I think you people in the West, you have seen this repeatedly. It happened in 1929 when the system got into problems, and it has been happening again and again. When there is a lot of production, but there is little consumption, the system gets into trouble. But the two people, the producer and the consumer, need to be linked by another person. This is the person who develops the infrastructure. Because I am point A, you are at point B, there is no road to link us, or airline, or ship. We cannot be linked. So the consumer and the producer need to be linked by that third person, the developer of the infrastructure. I am trying to simplify because I have been active in these things for the last 50 years, and I know all these conferences. You can spend a lot of time talking and get little out of it. So I try to really go to the basics so that we don't have to waste time. So therefore, when you apply these three yardsticks, consumer, producer, infrastructure, to Africa, you will see that Africa is the continent of the future and of the present as far as prosperity of the whole world, not only of Africa, is concerned. Recently, when China was getting out of poverty and becoming a middle income and a big economy, it stimulated the economy of the whole world. The price of steel went up, the price of cement went up, the price of copper went up. Why? Because new buyers from China, new consumers, were entering the market. Now, the consumption in China seems to be going down, understandably. Why? Because if you build a railway line and you use steel and you use cement to build it, you cannot do it every year. You do it once every 50 years. So then what happens after that? You have already built it, it is in place, you can't build it again. So the demand goes down. Now it is Africa to help, help ourselves, but also help the world economy. The population in Africa is now one problem of Africa has been a small population. I have been seeing groups which come to stop women from having children, but I've been discouraging them in Uganda because our problem was not overpopulation, but rather underpopulation. Africa is 12 times the size of India in land area. However, the population of Africa, even today, is slightly smaller than the one of India. So therefore, population is not the big problem of Africa. But that's another subject. The good thing is that the population of Africa is now coming up. It is 1.2 billion now, and it will be 2.5 billion by 2050. And the Africans are waking up to the bottlenecks that have been keeping them behind. One of the speakers said the economies of Africa have been growing at a high rates of growth. Yes, it's true, 6% and so on. In spite of the bottlenecks, those economies have been growing in spite of lack of electricity, in spite of inadequate infrastructure for transport, but they have been growing. Now, the Africans have identified those bottlenecks: lack of electricity, high transport costs, inefficiency in business regulation, and so on. Once they are solved, the economies in Africa will grow at double digits. So therefore, when we are here, no, but before I conclude that part, I must also bring up one point. The relationship between the consumer and the buyer cannot be sustainable if A produces and B only buys. The sustainable relationship is for A to produce and B also to produce, so that you exchange your products and services. Therefore, if there are people here with money, that's why I insist on talking to people of money. If you don't have money, please, you should have told me not to come, because I no longer want to waste my time. The Africans would develop one way or the other, but it is faster if you people who already have money can come now. It's good for you, it's good for us. Therefore, it is important that you come and invest in these sectors in Africa: agriculture, especially processing, industry, services, ICT. As far as Uganda is concerned, those are the 4 crucial sectors, including infrastructure: agriculture, industry, services, ICT, and infrastructure. When you do that, you produce goods and services in Uganda, adding to whatever we are doing now. But in so doing, you also create jobs. And when you create jobs, you enhance the purchasing power of the Africans, of the Ugandans in this case. When the Ugandans have got enhanced purchasing power, they will buy more of your goods and also more of the goods within Uganda. So therefore, what Africa needs what Uganda needs, let me talk about Uganda, is entrepreneurs. An entrepreneur is somebody who has got spectacles to see opportunity. That's what we call an entrepreneur. And has also got money to implement to take advantage of the opportunity he has seen. We also want tourists, these people who come to see the beauties of Uganda. But we also want trade. So those three words: investors, tourists, and trade. With these few words, since we are many, I thank you very much, and I hope I've already been assured that that 80% of the people here are rich. They are not bureaucrats. They are not just talkers. They are people with money. Muito obrigado.
Mr. President, thank you very much for your encouraging and enlightening remarks. A little known fact is that when the President took office in Uganda, inflation was literally what is called hyperinflation at that time. And today the economy is booming, communication infrastructure is in place. It's improved 100-fold actually, but a lot more can be done, and with the benefit of partners around the room, hopefully that can be achieved. I'd like to invite the next speaker, President Johnson Sirleaf from Liberia. She's not new to the international community. She's actually a daughter of the UN system, having spent 5 years in the UN as the regional director for the Regional Bureau for Africa. More importantly, the Sustainable Development Goals have been determined based on the report she produced about, I think it was 2011. It was a report she co-chaired with Prime Minister David Cameron and the President of Indonesia. So you, Madam, you've actually been really giving us the light to make this happen. So we are so honored to have you here. I know you've faced a number of economic challenges as a result of Ebola, etc., and how elegantly the region is coming back into power, economic power. So we warmly welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me also say thanks to the organizers of this event and to all of those at the high table, how pleased it is to be here with you to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. I'd like to join in the applaud for Mr. Kutesa and Ambassador Kamua of Kenya, two Africans who virtually negotiated the Sustainable Development Goals through very difficult waters. And as we are going to approve them, we hope on Friday, we want to give them a lot of credit. The Sustainable Development Goals, as you know, has 17 goals. Some of them have been mentioned by President Museveni or by the moderator, and they have 179 targets. That means that they're sufficiently diversified so that everyone can see something in it for them. I want to see how the consultative process was so expansive, and for the first time in the formulation of development goals, the private sector and civil society played key roles. And that was a strong message that as we go forward for implementation, that the private sector is expected not only to have contributed to the formulation of those goals, but expected to be a full partner in the implementation. After we got through with formulating the goals, we went to Addis Ababa, and there where we had the Addis Addis Agenda for Action, and that's supposed to be the means of implementation of the goals. And there was a departure from the previous goals when we had NEPAD, the partnership, new partnership for Africa development, with an attempt to try to mobilize resources from partners as a means of financing the goals and the objectives. But in the financing for development, there was something where everyone recognized mutual responsibility. Mutual responsibility suggesting that first and foremost, every country, it's not only Africa, but every country would first make sure that their own endowment, their own allocation had a level of efficiency so that they were able, on the basis of their endowment, to mobilize sufficient resources for their own development. But at the same time, on a mutual responsibility, we recognize that many of our countries, particularly the countries in Africa, having been exploited for so long, that our resources had gone, and therefore there was that differentiated responsibility that you have to give something back. And that means looking at the whole international taxation system. Are the countries getting their fair share of the resources? Looking at illicit flows, how are they leaving the country? Those flows that could really be financing development. Those were some of the things that came out of Addis Ababa in the Financing for Development Conference that makes this agenda so much different and makes it so inclusive of all the things that you can think of. For us in Africa, it's been mentioned by President Museveni, African economies are growing at a very fast pace. I think it's been noted and recorded that we are the fastest growing region. But yet, that transformation that's called for in the SDGs is still lacking. It's lacking because, according to the latest report I saw, only 38% of Africans have access to electricity, only 10% to the internet, only a quarter of the population with good roads. There are exceptions, of course. There are a lot of diversity in Africa, whether you can be dealing with South Africa that may be far ahead, or you can be dealing with some of the more industrialized ones, whether it's Kenya or Uganda or Ghana or Ethiopia, or in fact Ethiopia, one of the fastest growing economies right now, with a major effort for industrialization, setting examples all over the continent. So the opportunities then for this transformation that we all looked for under the new agenda means that we've got to fix our infrastructure. And our whole African Union Agenda 2063 that has transformation at its basis calls for massive investment in infrastructure, whether we're dealing with power or roads or ports or telecommunication. And I believe that's where many of your opportunities will come in, because the opportunities to be able to do that, as you move into my area, West Africa, there where the infrastructure deficit is so profound that we can't move, and we know that the balkanized state of our country means we must also promote regional cooperation. And that's what's now happening, to be able to have the economies of scales that major investors would look for, to be able to have the comparative advantages in certain areas recognized, but at the same time, the opening up of markets, the opening up of borders will enable us to be able to look for large-scale investment, because you can penetrate the others. And so in Liberia, we, if I may come to that, Liberia is well endowed with natural resources. Whether we're dealing with iron ore, whose prices are now rock bottom, or rubber, same. But we're first starting gold. We had our first gold exports, forestry, agriculture. We too are exploring for petroleum. So, and that's not just Liberia, that's the same with all of the neighboring countries in West Africa, where they're all endowed and not up to the level of development and industrialization as we find in Southern and Eastern Africa because of our infrastructure deficit. When you're dealing with West Africa and Central Africa, there's this major need to be able to improve roads and powers and ports and whatnot. But the opportunities are there. And so I hope that in this group, there will be those who will recognize that. I don't know where the investors in here are coming. If they are from the US, then I would say to you, you're not using the opportunities that are there. You need to do more to be able to do it. China's doing it. And so where are you? You need to be there, because I think people like to see US investors. People want to see diversity in the investment in their economies. And so I just hope that this particular meeting will enable some of you to reinforce your own desire to do partnership. Public-private partnership is now a major element coming out of the Addis Ababa, that no longer do we say you invest, but now we want you to be a partner either to the government itself or to local investors, so that partnership will enable us to open up more possibilities. So I just want to thank those of you who are here and say that we hope we'll see you in our country, in some country in Africa very soon. We hope before you leave here, you'll be able to meet someone and talk a deal, make a deal, because if we make this new agenda work, which has poverty at its core, then what we do is to increase the purchasing power. If you increase the purchasing power, that's good business, that's good profit for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. One other point I think you might be interested in knowing, that the President is the first democratically elected woman leader in Africa. So thank you. So our next speaker is the distinguished President Mutharika of Malawi. He incidentally is actively involved in a number of UN issues, and I want to mention to you, if you recognize this pin, it stands for He for She campaign, and the President is a champion for UN women on this issue. And once again, we talked about opportunities in Africa. You have the Foreign Minister of Malawi here. The Minister for Trade and Industry is here. We want you to take this opportunity in the afternoon session after you hear from the President's strategy and plans. Despite the challenges, Mr. President, you face about food shortages, etc., we admire the economic activity going on. So welcome, sir, and we are honored to have you here. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, first of all, I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to our host, Thomson Reuters, for organizing such a strategic and informative event for the African heads of state and government. The importance of the African trade investment in infrastructure development and fostering regional economic integration cannot be overemphasized. Although the African continent has made positive strides in market integration through trade liberalization within regional economic communities, intercontinental and regional trade remains dismal compared to trade in other regions outside Africa. This underperformance is largely attributed to a poor state of transport infrastructure and limited investment in infrastructure development. You may wish to know, Your Excellencies and distinguished gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, that this situation has led to poor linkages among African countries and limited industrialization on the continent. For this reason, Africa has continued to export raw and semi-processed products to markets outside Africa. However, it is important to note that under the various African regional economic communities, positive steps and strategies have now been put in place to ensure the benefits of regional economic integration and realize that they have impact on economic development and poverty reduction in our countries. Under the Southern African Development Community, SADC, Common Market for Eastern Africa Commission, the Republic Free Area, industrialization is high on the agenda for fostering regional integration. We all agree that industrialization, value addition, promotion of regional value chains is a catalyst for economic growth in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, the prerequisite to achieving effective regional economic integration that addresses the development needs of Africa is by securing adequate resources to support infrastructure development. As you're aware, resource mobilization option for Africa includes domestic government revenues and foreign direct investment from within and outside the continent. However, financing infrastructure through government resources has proved to be challenging for most of us due to limited resource base and other competing social needs. Nevertheless, the financial gap, as highlighted here, is a perfect opportunity for the private sector to partner with African governments in infrastructure development. I'm happy to report that most African governments have embarked on legislative, regulatory, and administrative reforms to create a conducive environment for foreign direct investment. You wish to note that my government, as in this case with other governments, is aggressively implementing these reforms, among others, streamlining business registration process and enacting laws that are investment friendly. Our goal is to make the investment process in Malawi cheaper, faster, and simpler. Therefore, investors are encouraged to come to Malawi. As you know, investors are normally concerned about two things. That is a market and investment security. In the case of Malawi, although we are a country of 50 million people, we have a huge market through SADC, COMESA, African region, through AGOA, United States, and through Europe under the EBA, everything but arms initiative of the European Union. In addition to that, we have bilateral agreements with China, Japan, and India, where any investor in Malawi can in fact access all these markets. So it's very conducive to investment. Secondly, investment security. I know many investors are concerned about their own security, whether it's physical security or commercial security. I've assured investors that if they come to Malawi, they'll be safe at home, at work, and in between, as far as physical security is concerned. With respect to investment security, I can assure investors that Malawi no longer subscribes to the old theories of expropriation or creeping taxation. We'll make sure that your investment is secure when you come there. We have a well-established system of rule of law, and we have international instruments, including ICSID and others, where if there are any disputes, you have recourse, and you have made sure that your investment is not jeopardized. So the atmosphere is very conducive, and the private sector is very welcome in Malawi. As a matter of fact, I think I'm the only president in Africa, probably, who actually selected a running mate from the private sector, who was not even a politician. He was not even a member of my political party, and he's now the vice president. I brought him there because I want to establish the importance of the private sector, both domestic and international, to the development of Malawi. With these words, let me thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we really appreciate your comments and remarks, and I also want to take this opportunity to thank my good friend, Ambassador Brian Bowler, who's in the audience as well, who's a permanent representative of your permanent representative based here. So much has been talked about Ethiopia. It's like we all know the Prime Minister who's here. In Addis, there were a number of great initiatives adopted, including the plan of action financing the SDGs. But one of the things which came out was quite clear that we need to focus on 5 issues globally: peace, prosperity, people, planet, and partnerships. And I took the liberty of converting that into a simple sentence that all of us should be striving for creating peace and prosperity for people and the planet through partnerships. And that's what the Honorable Prime Minister has strived for, actually, and we are so grateful that Ethiopia took the lead in adopting this historic agenda which will drive the investments into the SDGs. I believe that at the end of the day, as all the previous speakers have said, it's about investing in the SDGs. The international community spends about $120 to $150 billion in aid. The requirement for the SDGs has been estimated between 500 and 600 billion a year. Where will that come from? Private sector investment, where we will be able to answer the question, what's in it for me? So that the private sector sees value, so they do well, and they also do good in that process. So, Prime Minister, I warmly welcome you here as you take the lead for the SDGs. Welcome, sir.
Your Excellencies, fellow heads of state, and distinguished participants, I am so glad today standing before you to show our commitment of the African leaders that the African rising narrative is true, and it's a fact that we need to work very closely together. I say this because, you know, it has been a century for the Asians, the last century, and now we are coming up as a continent to show that this is a century for Africa. Africa is rising. Africa has been growing as very fast in economic development, not only in economic development alone, but also in human development. We have a demographic dividend where 70% of our population is a very young, dynamic, which is suitable for investment. Your Excellencies, we recognize that you are not coming for charity. You are coming to make profit. So we have to make the environment for investment conducive in such a way that we have political stability, macroeconomic stability, zero tolerance for corruption, and so that you will be confident to get return out of your investment. In Sustainable Development Goals, we recognized that Africa has responsibility to mobilize its own domestic resources in terms of tax collection and as well as domestic savings. You are coming to support us in our endeavor to move very fast and move very quickly to eradicate poverty by 2030. That's the goal of the sustainable development. So I think this is a time for you to come and invest in our respective countries. We are representing all African, not only our individual countries here, because that narrative is true to all Africans. That doesn't mean that there is no problem in certain areas in Africa where we have to address. We know and understand that peace is very essential for investment to happen. And we are working on peace and stability in some of our countries in Africa, which is essential. And of course, we are handling this with commitment, and we are getting results. So usually, the big international media outlets are portraying that Africa is like those few countries in Africa where there are lack of peace and security. But that's not true. In the majority, Africa is stable, and Africa is moving into democratic course, and Africa is dependable to invest in. So I call upon all of you that we are committed to make the investment environment conducive for you to come and invest in our countries. As my fellow president said, I think the most important thing is that Africa has comparative advantage. And this comparative advantage is that in Asian countries, now the labor cost is soaring, and Africa has cheap labor, where light manufacturing and modernizing agriculture can yield result. So we believe that as we put in our SDGs, economic structural transformation is the agenda of the day in Africa, and we have to move from modernizing our agriculture to value addition and manufacturing. So I think this is high time, and I call upon you to invest in Africa, and specifically in my country, which I represent today, Ethiopia, where the last 10 years, my country has witnessed a double-digit growth of 11% on average, which is remarkable, and we have extricated huge and millions of our population from poverty. And apart from that, we have been working on human capital development, where we have a number of mid-level and high-level professionals being trained, which are conducive for the investment you are pursuing in our countries. Our private sector is also becoming vibrant, so a joint venturing opportunity is huge that you can work with us. So now I would like to say that Africa wants to have a green growth economic development path, which is the future of the globe. And I think we can start in Africa this venture, and the global community can learn from us. Ethiopia has set forth a green growth economic path where we have climate resilient green growth strategy developed that can be implemented together with us. So I think this is an area where we can have smart investment you seek for. So come to Africa, and we invite you to invest with us, and we will give you all the assurances that's necessary for a private sector who wants to prosper together with us. So thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Prime Minister Desalegn Boucher. We really appreciate your remarks. I want to read out something which the President of the European Parliament said upon the appointment of the Prime Minister. After meeting with Haile Mariam, he said, I can see his desire to strengthen democracy in the country, allowing for greater pluralism and a freer civil society, to uphold the freedoms enshrined in the Ethiopian constitution was clear. Thank you, sir. So we have the Vice President of South Sudan here, and we are so honored that South Sudan is, I think, participating for the first time after becoming, second time visit to the first time here, Thomson Reuters. You were here last year, sir, with us, and I'm really grateful to have the Vice President, Mr. James Bani Iga, to be with us. I'd like to invite him to the podium to share his thoughts about South Sudan as the... He's not here? He'll be coming later on? Okay. So I am sorry you will miss out on the investment opportunities just for another 10 minutes in South Sudan. In the meantime, you will have an opportunity to do some Q&A with our distinguished heads of state and government here. So I would like to invite questions from the floor, maybe some ideas you might have in terms of partnership and collaboration. Yes, sir. Would you like to state your name, organization, rank and serial number? Thank you.
Okay, the name is Tunde Aboyadeko. I represent Chartered Capital. We're a merchant bank here in New York. This question is directed to Mrs. Johnson Sirleaf. Forgive me if I didn't pronounce it correctly. Now, you talked about regional integration in West Africa, and I'm just wondering how far that has gone. How far down the road has that gone, and what level of cooperation are you getting, and what should we expect as investors? When do we think we can get something from this and be encouraged to invest and expect that our investment can actually go across the borders and be able to sell across the borders that currently exist? Thank you.
Just to mention a few things, in ECOWAS, the countries of the Economic Community of West African States have now moving toward a common external tariff. There's certain of our countries that have a common currency, the Francophone bloc. That's not the same for the Anglophone bloc. We've just started interconnectivity in our road systems, and so there's roadways that are going from, what are you dealing from Senegal all the way to Nigeria and further. We've established a West Africa power pool so that electricity can be, those with the electricity surplus can be able to share those who have a deficit. And so the cooperation and integration have moved quite successfully a long ways. I invite you to go to the ECOWAS website, and you'll be able to get some of the details of that integration that is taking place.
Thank you. So the ECOWAS website, if you do a search, you'll find that information. Anybody else? Ambassador Margaret, sir. No. Question? Thank you. I believe the Foreign Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo is here, would like to take the floor.
Are you from Ghana?
May I invite the Honorable Foreign Minister, sir? Please, may I invite you to the podium, sir? it's a little easier. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me the floor, sir. Just a few words. First, a word on my country, the DRC, which over the last 15 years has gone from despair to hope. A country whose success story is rarely told, and thus whose narrative has to change. DRC has always been known as a land of great potential and many investment opportunities. What is not known, let alone said enough, is that as we speak, these potentials and opportunities are being translated into actual realities. To name just a few achievements, basic infrastructure is in constant rehabilitation and modernization, and that is nationwide. A stable macroeconomic environment characterized by a low inflation rate, close to 0% over the last 2 years, and an average growth rate of about 8.2% for the last 3 years. I would like also, in addition to that, to name an abundant skilled and cheap labor, an increasingly attractive and competitive business environment, a more appropriate and reassuring political environment and consolidating democracy, and a large market in the heart of Africa. My second word has to do with the SDGs. To achieve these objectives, we have to meet a big challenge. The challenge of economic transformation, which entails value addition and beneficiation, and calls for the development of infrastructure and value chains. In that regard, I would like to call the attention of the people gathering here on two sectors which can help make a difference on our continent. Those are the energy sector and the agriculture sector. Talking about the energy sector, the DRC has enormous assets for the development of this sector. A hydroelectric potential of 100,000 megawatts, which represents 23% of global potential and 37% of African potential. 52% of freshwater reserves in Africa, and various potentials in renewable energy, that is solar, wind, biomass, geothermal, and the likes. The flagship project under this sector is, of course, the hydroelectric Grand Inga Dam project. It is worth noting that the sole site of Inga has a potential of 44,000 megawatts. Fully developed, it could power most of the Africa continent, thus creating endless opportunities for industrialization and the betterment of the livelihood of African populations. The second sector is agriculture, and I would even say agro-industry. DRC has enormous assets for the development of the agriculture sector. 80 million hectares of arable land and 4 million hectares of irrigable land. A fishing potential of 700,000 tons of fish per year and vast areas of pasture for raising of more than 40 million heads of cattle. To develop this potential, the policy of the government is to promote the development of 22 agro-industrial parks, including Bukangalonzo, which is already operational. We welcome investors to help DRC develop these agro-industrial parks, which can contribute a lot to the food security, not only in the DRC, but in Africa. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Foreign Minister, and thank you for outlining the energy needs of your country, and we hope that there'll be many other opportunities for the private sector to be engaged there in DRC. I'm actually very pleased and honored that we have the Vice President of the Republic of South Sudan who's just joined us, Mr. James Wani Iga. And I'm sorry I'm not giving you time to sit there, and maybe I would like to invite you to the podium, as we've all been eagerly waiting to hear from you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Welcome, sir.
Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, on the issue of investment in our continent, with about 30 million square kilometers, Africa is not only the world's second largest continent, but one with the largest reserves. Reserves of precious metals and so on, being home to about 90% of the world's platinum reserves, 40% of gold, 65% of cobalt, large deposits of iron ore, oil and gas. The continent has, in the last 2 decades, been an attractive destination of capital flow and foreign direct investment, FDI. However, the current continental economic structures do not allow Africa to take advantage of this high volume of capital flow and access to new technological innovation. And because intra-Africa growth linkages are almost non-existent, important reforms to regional and continental growth strategies are imperative. Railways, highways, connecting landlocked countries like mine and others, which are currently dependent on air transportation, will go a long way in creating a continental economy. As of today, Africa's agricultural and industrial productivity remains the lowest in the world. Hence, the only way we can collectively chart the way forward is to develop a common policy on overcoming repository of common economic challenges. We must together to challenge the perception of the typical African over the coming decades from a poor farmer or rebel to a successful entrepreneur. This calls for restructuring Africa's industrial base to raise the productivity of investments and increase the volume of returns. Intra-Africa trade in goods, services, and capital requires more flexible legal frameworks and less cumbersome and protective borders. It is a common fact that bad infrastructure and rent seeking have for long been indirect measures that have had the same effect as high tariffs and taxes. These direct and indirect barriers must be quickly destroyed, starting by fast tracking full regional economic integration. Equal to policy-related impediments, human flight caused by negative forces in the continent, such as Boko Haram, the Lord's Resistance Army, Al-Shabaab, and others, have had a significantly negative impact on Africa's investment climate. This is caused by the fragility of African states, where peaceful and periodic political transition have been witnessed in few countries, while many continue to experience violent political power contest. It is our duty as African leaders to strengthen political systems and encourage inclusive governance so as to embrace the diverse views within our respective nations. Last but not least, in the context of our continent, before I go to my own country, is the issue of service provision. The last outbreak of Ebola in West Africa was a devastating reminder that the continent's positive growth rates in the last decade have not been grassroots based. While much has been achieved, HIV, AIDS, malaria, etc., continue to claim millions of lives annually, especially at the rural areas. Access to maternal and general health care facilities, clean drinking water, and primary education should be the benchmarks by which Africa's positive growth is measured. Hence, widening the continent's economic base and redistribution of the benefits therein remain the objective economic policy making worldwide, especially with the continent. Let me come to my own country, ladies and gentlemen. With its size of some 648,000 square kilometers, South Sudan is gifted with lots of natural resources. But typical of continental levels, while individual countries are endowed with natural resources, the majority of my citizens remain left out from the benefits accruing to their country. And as a new country, South Sudan aspires to offer the continent with new opportunities for expanding investments. True, even after its independence, the country has been afflicted by 20 months of civil war. But last August, the guns have been silenced. What remains now is the deployment of the ceasefire monitors and verifiers. Thanks to the efforts of the IGAD countries, the Troika, China, Russia, and the rest of the friends of IGAD, efforts are being exerted. We are now only waiting for the esteemed IGAD and its partners to expeditiously deploy them for us to honestly enter the next phase of peace implementation and create a conducive investment climate. The investment climate in South Sudan is governed by many factors, such as the country's expansive territory and unique location right at the center of Africa. For example, from a town called Tali in South Sudan to Cape Town in the south, and from there to Cairo in the north is equidistant. The same equidistant is from that same town, Tali, in South Sudan, to west in the Atlantic, and then east in the Indian Ocean. So we are actually the center of Africa. The example of this huge territory is blessed with vast natural resources, of course, including fertile lands, vast hardwood forests, over 25 million heads of livestock in my country, countless fresh water linkages and rivers. In addition to this, we have over 20 metallic minerals, ranging from diamond, gold, uranium, mercury, and so on. South Sudan subunit climate averages between 20 to 30 degrees centigrade, and is subdivided into numerous agroecological zones, including some of the largest floodplains in the world, some of which experience almost a year-round rainfall. These climatic natural endowments make the country an investor dreamland, where a wide range of economic activities, such as growing cash crops, meat production, and the supply of freshwater fish, to name but a few, could be undertaken with minimum capital injection. South Sudan is also home to one of the 5 largest wetlands and floodplains in the world. The 57,000 square kilometers wetlands of South region has seen an annual animal migration that has been compared to Tanzania's famous Serengeti migration by the year 2005. By the year 2005, USAID aerial survey has indicated this. Hence, there lies enormous potential for a lucrative tourism industry in my country, which will further enrich the already famous tourist destination of East Africa. South Sudan is the 3rd largest oil producer in sub-Saharan Africa, with a current production potential of over 350,000 barrels per day. The country's extremely underdeveloped oil and gas industrial production beckons for massive capital injection with a guaranteed return on investment. There are over 20 minerals that have been for long mined by locals, including gold, copper, mercury, iron ore, and so on. Given the central role played by legislation in determining the attractiveness of any investment destination, the Republic of South Sudan has endeavored to enact laws that are geared towards establishing a conducive business environment. The South Sudan Investment Promotion Act, for example, 2009, and Companies Act 2011 provide attractive incentives to foreign, regional, and local industries such as easy land acquisition, company registration, income or profit repatriation, and duty exemptions and anti-expropriation measures. Your Excellencies, in conclusion, political instability and civil war seem to be the main hurdles to Africa's sustainable take-off into economic growth and development. I'm talking from a real experience in my own country, as I already mentioned. However, while we must collectively devise systems that discourage violent political power contest, continuing in the path of development has proven to be another viable means of peace building. Peace through development is not an abstract theme. It indeed leads to cemented peace. Having gone through colonialism at the same time frame, African states are facing the economic forces of neo-colonialism at the same time too. We are bound by a common past and present. There is no way that any country in Africa could argue that it will be able, isolated, to shut its future from the rest of the neighbors. At this juncture, ladies and gentlemen, possible, let me really apologize for having come late. I am new in New York and everything went new. That explains why my driver was also probably new to the scene and we got delayed. Thank you very much for listening.
Mr. Vice President, thank you so much, and we wish you every success in what you're trying to do. President Museveni wanted to make some remarks, and just before I give the floor to President Museveni, I would like to thank President Johnson Sirleaf for being with us, and we are so grateful that you took the time to share with us your experiences, and we wish you Godspeed in the work you're doing here. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well, Excellencies and the organizers, the questioner asked President Sirleaf Johnson the issue of economic integration in Africa. As I told you, Africa is very huge, and as all the speakers were saying, 30 million square kilometers of land, 1.2 billion people now, 2.5 billion in the next 40 years. But because of colonialism, Africa had been fragmented into 54 different countries. That's how we got independence. Fortunately, our leaders in 1980, they realized this and held a conference in Lagos, Nigeria. And they worked out what they called the Lagos Plan of Action. The plan of action was to integrate these 54 countries into one market, but starting with what they called the regional blocks: East, West, South, North. So what Her Excellency Sirleaf was telling you was on the ECOWAS, the one you were asking about, of West Africa. But there is also COMESA, Common Market of Eastern, Southern and Central Africa, the one in the east. That one caters for 400 million people on that side of the east. And then there is SADC in the south. And then the East African Community in the mid-east of Africa. We are now working on what we call the tripartite. That is COMESA, East African Community, and SADC, Southern Africa, to make them one, and eventually have the whole continent as one market. So this is very crucial for you to understand, because we had to solve this problem. Because remember what I said in my introduction, was that the lifeblood of business is selling. If you produce and you sell more and you expand. So we had to solve this problem within Africa. And as His Excellency said, we have not ended there. As far as the market is concerned, we have also negotiated with our friends here in the United States, and we told them that, please, instead of telling us about aid, you tell us about trade. You open your market to us. Fortunately, President Clinton and later President Bush and President Obama, they opened their market to us here. So there is a trade arrangement called AGOA, African Growth and Opportunity Act, where you can export 6,500 products to the US, tax-free, quota-free, if you produce something in Africa. We have also got a similar arrangement with China. I think China, they have allowed us now 440 products, although they said they will open more. Even India, they talked, they didn't implement, but at least they talked about the same. Even Japan. So the point is that when you invest in any of these African countries, you do not only have the market of that individual country, you have the market of the region, eventually the market of the whole of Africa, but also the market of our partners, our trade partners in the world. I thought I should add to what Her Excellency was saying.
Thank you. Thank you, President Museveni, for the very good clarity. I know we are very tight for time. And my good friend, partner and supporter of this effort, Barbara Samuels, had a question. I also want to thank Yvonne Bending-Rothschild, who's the Executive Director of the European American Chamber of Commerce. Yvonne, thank you for what you do. And I'm going to invite you to figure out how, through your network, we can create more investment opportunities for Africa. So I leave that thought for you. There's no rush. Tomorrow morning is fine.
There is a young lady there who is dying with a question.
Yes. Yeah, please ask. Yes. And whilst they're going to the mic, I want to thank Mariola Pogashnik, who's the Director for Advisory Services at PwC, for being with us. PricewaterhouseCoopers is one of the largest accounting firms, and we count on you to help promote Africa as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Museveni, for recognizing me to ask this question. My name is Donna Sims Wilson, and I'm president of a firm called Smith Graham & Company, an African-American-owned investment management firm with $6 billion in assets under management. And I was privileged this morning to speak on a panel earlier invited here by Hubert Danso and the wonderful team at AI. And we were talking about women's empowerment. And I would just like to expand that conversation into the diaspora. And so my question is, how are you working with the diaspora of your respective countries to stimulate investments in your countries? Of course, recent immigrants to all over the world, and especially the United States, are prolific. But I'm speaking more specifically of ancient immigrants to the United States, primarily African Americans, who never before in the history of the United States are in positions of power to do business and to invest in a mutually beneficial way, from the President of the United States to heads of major corporations, and more specifically to this audience, African Americans who head up pension boards that are making private equity investments. For example, the New York State Common Retirement Fund, the head of that, the chief investment officer, is an African American woman, and her deputy, who's sitting right here, they've announced that they're going to invest 3% of their $160 billion in assets in Africa. There are other African American heads of pension boards in the room today. So the question again is, how are you working with and mobilizing the current and ancient diaspora to stimulate investment in your respective countries? Thank you.
Yeah, you see the issue of waking up in Western Europe. There was the Roman Empire, which was a civilized world. It collapsed around 450 AD. It collapsed, was taken over by barbarians. Then there was 1,000 years of the Dark Ages in Europe. And then around 1400, the Renaissance started, the rebirth of knowledge and civilization. Even then, it took them many years to know what to do. Some people were saying this, others were saying that. And it was not until about 1776, or after almost 300 years of the Renaissance, when one of the thinkers called Adam Smith was able to give some guidance as how things can move. So similarly with Africa, there's been a lot of ideological meandering. This one is saying this, that one is saying that, the donor agency is saying this, the World Bank saying that. So there's been a little bit of lost time. For instance, the growth you hear, the high rate of growth, as I said in my remarks, has been happening in spite of certain bottlenecks. Bottlenecks, no electricity, no transport network, as you heard people saying. But fortunately, these bottlenecks are now realized. Number one, there must be enough electricity. So we are all investing in electricity. Many of us are investing in electricity. Transport, we are working on the roads and the railways. So therefore, this is the time to tap all that potential, like the diaspora you're talking about. The African Americans who came long ago, and the Africans who have come more recently. So in the case of Uganda, we have created a desk in the President's office, in Foreign Affairs, and also in the Uganda Investment Authority to link up with the diaspora, both old and new, so that we take advantage of that capital which you have, of the entrepreneurship you have, but also having on our side created a more favorable atmosphere for your investments. Cheap electricity, lower transport costs, less bureaucracy in licensing, and so on. I thank you very much. And I would like to be in touch with you. my office here, my people here should be in touch with you. There is this ambassador, I don't know whether you have ever seen her. No, you go and talk to her, don't just say Washington. Go and talk to her now. Don't say Washington, because...
How about Kampala, sir? We all want to go to Kampala.
But you're most welcome to Kampala, but she will look for her here. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.